If you spend 5 minutes within some sphere of the Monster Hunter fandom, be it Reddit, Twitter, or God forbid the mutated breeding ground known as a Facebook Monster Hunter group, then you've probably seen some discourse between new and old hunters about the presence of quality of life additions, sort of in the same way that a Devil Joe and Basilgeuse will have some discourse over who's going to be having the next meal. Now, usually these discussions revolve around the mobility of the hunters, the tighter hitbox of the monsters, and navigation of the various maps. Slightly less talked about, but still not without its own controversy, is the ease of acquiring resources. Note, when I'm talking about resources, I am not speaking about monster materials such as horns, tails, gems, scales, or anything else you can get from a monster, because that could actually be its own discussion. No, instead, I'm talking about items, and specifically component-styled items such as honey, blue mushrooms, bitter bugs, mite seed, really anything that can go into a potion or some kind of performance-enhancing drug to make it stronger. There have been many discussions about the effect on gameplay that this has, but I will focus most of my discussion around the narrative justification behind it, and why it makes sense from that perspective. Now, for those of you who are new to the series, important resources like honey are acquired one of two ways: foraging through the maps in the early game, and at a certain point in the story through farming or some type of trading mechanic. In newer games, the latter option appears quite earlier than in older games, with the older games usually allowing you to do it after some kind of great feat, beating Lagiacrus in 3 Ultimate being one, or repelling Nakarkos in Generations Ultimate being another. Due to the fact that hunting monsters becomes a lot easier, or at the very least less frightening, when you have an abundance of mega potions, mega demon drugs, mega dash juices, and others, this is usually seen as a reward for your hard work by the player base. I'm focusing especially on honey because you need that to make mega potions and catalysts, which themselves can be used to make demon drugs and other similar buff-based potions. Now, how early this is given has been a point of contention, and its existence at all is considered an affront to some of the really old heads who have been playing Monster Hunter since the first game. Usually, this is argued from a gameplay perspective as a stance against the idea of streamlining, though people within a more thematic scene of Monster Hunter's fandom have said that this also undermines the hunter-gatherer aesthetics of Monster Hunter, and this point is something that I would actually like to address. So if we view our hunters as some type of hunter-gatherer types, similar to the various indigenous groups of our own world, then yes, relying on a supply of farmed or traded goods to make our hunts more accessible would go against that very idea. However, I'm here to argue that our hunters are not hunter-gatherers. They are a part of a guild, actually, of hunters, an organization of professionals who ply their trade, that being monster hunting as a means to make ends meet and to put food on the table. In fact, many of the stories of the mainline Monster Hunter games might not have you being native to the village that you spend most of your time in, but instead being sent by the guild to assist in driving out some type of threat to the local way of life. Going by this, we can also assume that in the early stages, the guild see you basically as an untested, unproven, snot-nosed kid barely off your mom's tits. Though gameplay-wise our hunters can't die, there are more than a few stories of hunters biting off more than they can chew and being eaten, or at the very least killed, by the various beasts that they hunt. So the guild probably has plenty of reason to assume you might be another casualty. If you look at the guild as a type of business as much as they are a spicy animal control, then you can probably imagine that they see hunters as a reputation and financial investment. If that is the case, then you can probably assume they want to invest as much money and resources into a hunter that return their investment. Otherwise, that will go to waste. As such, why would they want to waste authorizing the trade or farming of honey, bitter bugs, and other valuable resources on some punk kid who probably puts his armor on the wrong side every time they wake up in the morning? I could even imagine some smug guild official telling a hunter complaining about supplies, "Oh, you're lucky that we send you with all 14 weapons and don't give you 2 rocks and a stick and say happy hunting." On the flip side, I imagine the more elite hunters, those seasoned in killing rare species, variants, and even some elder dragons would likely be drowning in resources for a number of reasons. For one, if you're an elite hunter, it isn't really becoming of your image to be seen rummaging around for honey and seeds like some type of scavenger. Secondly, they want you out there making some big money by taking out the most badass monsters and fulfilling those big contracts. Lastly, and this is something that requires you to take gameplay out of the equation, but the more time you spend out in the field, even when not on a hunt, the more at risk you are of injury, and I'm talking things like broken bones from a bad jump, getting attacked by small monsters, or a somewhat weaker large monster like a pack leader, or simply getting sick from the elements. If that happens, and you're on the shelf for a few months, then that's less time the elite hunter in question is making the guild money, which means they are not getting a return on their investment. Something similar to this happens in our own world with a number of sports leagues and certain acting roles. Some contracts for professional sports players flat out forbids them from taking part in other sports, getting too intense in the gym, and some even more restrictive contracts, depending on the country, might even prohibit the player from training outside of an allotted period of time or outside of a chosen facility. And you know why? Because if you get injured, then you're no longer providing the team with wins, and thus not getting them more money in sponsorships, merch sales, or other similar avenues. The system that makes the most sense to me from a purely narrative perspective is younger hunters and brand new hunters needing to pay their dues by making a name through hunting quickly, efficiently, and with minimum casualties. Once they've earned their stripes, then the guild will be willing to authorize more resources to them so they can focus all their attention on making the guild more money. On a moral standpoint, I don't necessarily agree with this fully, but I also don't look at the guild as very moral. They are a monopolistic organization that has cornered the market on a profession of monster hunting. And with events like telling the Moga villagers to abandon their cultural and ethnic homeland due to the presence of Cadius without even sending more help, forcing the one hunter there to flat out disobey their demand to retreat to drive the beast away, then I can see the guild looking at their hunters as tools to win money and influence. Now, with that logic, you may assume that I think that both 5th gen games allowing you to farm honey pretty early doesn't make much sense, and in the case of Rise, yeah, I agree. However, with World, regardless of how you see the moral implications of colonization of the new world, on a practical level it actually kind of makes sense. Due to the fact that reinforcements require sending fleets of hunters to the new world means every single hunter, researcher, botanist, merchant, smithy, and handler is invaluable. Ergo, any pre-existing favoritism between newer and older hunters needs to be reined in somewhat because, well, the more people you have alive and healthy, the smoother the colonization process will be. Anybody who's played Europa Universalis 4 can tell you this. Now, I might make a follow-up on what makes more sense in terms of the approach from a gameplay perspective, but this is something that I have wanted to at least touch on from a narrative perspective. I understand lots of people probably don't care about the narrative of Monster Hunter, which, I mean, Capcom hasn't really helped with that, but there is a contingent of people who do at least care about the lore of the games, and so I wanted to make this to explain my views to them. So if you were one of those people and you enjoyed, or if you agree, disagree, or just want me to explain my points deeper, then please feel free to explain in the comments. Oh, by the way, if you sub to me now, I'll be even closer to 100 subscribers. And if you follow me on Twitter, you can lose brain cells rapidly because my Twitter is garbage. But even if you do neither of those things, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a good one.